The morning started like any other, coffee in hand, uniform crisp, ready for another day at the police station, until I spotted a lime green paper under my windshield wiper, not a takeout menu but an HOA violation notice slapping me with a $79 fine for improper lawn maintenance. And I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at my lawn, green and mowed, same as it had been for 15 years. Then came the click of high heels on pavement, and Corinne Mitchell, our newest HOA tyrant, strutted up, tablet glowing, her sugary voice edged with venom as she chirped, "Good morning," barely glancing up to inform me my grass exceeded the 3-inch limit by half an inch per section 7, paragraph 3. I held up the notice, asking for an explanation since my lawn met any sane standard. But she tapped away, unfazed, warning the fine doubled in 72 hours and oh, my garden gnomes, my late wife's treasures, weren't on the approved decoration list. I took a deep breath, years of cop training keeping me steady. Mentioning a big case had me swamped, promising to mow by weekend, only for her to wave her tablet with a smug, "New board, new rules, we're modernizing, no tacky decor dragging down property values." And as she clicked off, I saw her stop at Sarah's next door, an ER nurse fresh off a grueling shift, snapping pics of her bins. Corinne wasn't just petty, she was on a mission. I slid into my car, pulse ticking up, and scrolled the neighborhood Facebook group. Complaints about Corinne piled high. Mark, the firefighter, fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The elderly Garcia's hit for unapproved rose bushes. A teacher cited for his unsightly old car in his own driveway. And my gut, honed by 25 years on the force, screamed this wasn't random annoyance but targeted harassment. Watching Corinne photograph my gnomes again, oblivious to who she was poking, I felt that shift. Sometimes the biggest crimes aren't flashy heists but quiet injustices chipping at a community's soul. And as chief of police, I knew a pattern of power abuse when I saw one. She thought a petty fine would make me bow, but she'd just lit a fuse she couldn't snuff out. Driving to work, my mind churned a plan. Corinne had no clue who she'd crossed or what I'd uncover once I started digging. And by the time I hit the station, I was already plotting how to flip this hunter into the hunted, her perfect little HOA world about to crack wide open. 2 days later, I pulled into my driveway after a brutal double shift. A bank robbery downtown had me wrangling chaos, and there sat 2 black SUVs branded HOA Security, blocking my access, Corinne strutting across my lawn in her designer suit, snapping pics of my hose, my mat, even my mailbox. I stepped out, exhaustion morphing to irritation, calling, "You're blocking my driveway," only for her to spin with that shampoo-ad hair swish, labeling me a persistent rule breaker with unpaid fines and a non-regulation mailbox color, classic white, not her mandated pristine pearl white. I laughed, recording her on my phone, pointing out her illegally parked goons violated city ordinance. But she smirked, claiming full HOA authority, and that's when I clocked it. Those security badges looked off, too close to real police ones, and as chief, I knew every legit outfit in town. Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one, and Corinne had just stepped into a mess she couldn't charm her way out of. I stood in my driveway, phone recording, as Corinne Mitchell preened over her tablet, oblivious to the storm brewing, her 2 security goons in ill-fitting uniforms leaning on their SUVs that blocked my path. Red nails tapping, she listed my sins. Unpaid lawn fine, rogue gnomes, and now a mailbox shade violation, her smile flickering when I pointed out her vehicles broke city law. "I have full authority to enforce community standards," she snapped, gesturing to her guards, but I'd already clocked their peeling shoulder patches. Cheap knockoffs, not legit security creds. And as chief of police, I knew no Mitchell Security Solutions was registered in our jurisdiction. I warned her blocking my driveway over a $79 fine was illegal, not just petty, but her face flushed to match her nails, spitting, "Is that a threat?" as her goons scribbled my aggressive attitude. I kept cool. 20 years on the force taught me temper loses fights. Watching her snap pics, my gut screaming something bigger was afoot. And when Mrs. Garcia, the nurse next door, rushed out, scrubs on, late for her hospital shift because those same SUVs boxed her in 2, Corinne's eyes widened at Chief, but doubled down, chin high, claiming HOA rules trumped titles. Back in my car, I pulled the city's business license database. 3 taps confirmed no Mitchell Security existed, and the brother I'd seen at an HOA meeting in a matching uniform wasn't listed either. Karen strutted off, promising more fines for my uncooperative behavior. But Mrs. Garcia's plea stuck with me. First responders like her didn't need this harassment after saving lives. At the station, I dug deeper. Sarah, the ER nurse 3 doors down, knocked on my door at 6 a.m. that week, still in scrubs, tears brimming, showing me orange violation notices threatening a lien on her house for a garbage bin left out post-double shift during a bus crash crisis. Mark, the firefighter, texted pics of citations for his kid's basketball hoop, unchanged for 5 years until Karen's reign began. I spread the complaints on my kitchen table that night. Martinez family fined for Christmas lights up 2 days late during a funeral elderly Chen hit for her roses. And the pattern glared. Karen targeted homes of emergency workers, folks too busy or drained to fight back. Her rules, a calculated shakedown, not a cleanup. Then my deputy Tom buzzed. His subdivision had a flooding fix last spring, and Karen's brother's company nabbed the contract at triple the rival bids. Mrs. Chen whispered later about cameras on streetlights, pointed at specific houses, mine included, installed without consent, all under Karen's security banner. I walked her home, spotting Karen in her driveway with 2 unfamiliar men in her brother's uniforms, my cop instincts pinging hard. Unauthorized surveillance, shady contracts, targeting first responders. This wasn't just HOA overreach. It stank of something illegal, and my mentor's words echoed. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Karen's confidence had made her sloppy. She didn't know we were watching too. And as I eyed the evidence piling on my desk, I knew tomorrow's emergency HOA meeting would be her undoing, especially since I'd just been quietly tapped for the County Housing Authority Oversight Committee. She'd built a kingdom of fear, but I was about to burn it down with her own rules. I couldn't sleep that night, Karen's smug rules are rules looping in my head, so I sipped morning coffee at the station, recalling a rookie lesson. Follow the money, and her security goons' shiny new uniforms stuck out like a sore thumb. I asked Jenny and Records to run elite neighborhood watch services, and within minutes my hunch grew teeth. Registered 3 months ago, right when Karen joined the HOA owned by a Mitchell, her maiden name with a P.O. box, not an office. On my lunch break, I swung by Sarah's. She staggered off her hospital shift, bleary-eyed, waving another notice, fines stacking up on her nurse's pay for obscure rules she couldn't fight. And I saw the same exhaustion in Mark's texts, the firefighter drowning in hoop citations. Back at my desk, I dug into Karen's brother, Tom, 3 failed security firms across states, all shuttered after complaints of aggressive tactics and illegal parking, vanishing before probes could stick. At the county clerk's, Mrs. Rodriguez pulled HOA docs. Karen never disclosed her brother's company tie when snagging the security contract. A blatant conflict breach. But the jackpot hit when I found her home business registration. An unlicensed daycare in her garage. 6 kids daily, breaking the HOA's own ban on commercial activity she'd wielded against others, home offices. My phone buzzed. Mark sent pics of Karen's security cars in fire lanes, a firefighter's nightmare, and I mapped it out. Her back fence stretched 2 feet past her property line. Cruiser cam footage showed her goons blocking emergency access repeatedly, and HOA financials revealed she'd jacked fines to funnel cash to her brother's outfit. Every piece clicked, property records, photos, public docs. I copied it all, digital and physical, a cop's habit for bulletproof cases, knowing Karen's city council pals could twist this if I slipped. Then Officer Rodriguez burst in. Her security tried booting Dr. Thompson's car at the ER entrance mid-surgery rush, and my blood simmered, but I stayed ice cool. This was the clincher. I leaned back, evidence wall sprawling, timing the reveal. Karen's proposal for more guards and cameras dropped via my sergeant's text, an emergency HOA meeting set for tomorrow night, and I smiled. She'd handed me the stage to spring her own trap, her power trip about to crash into 20 years of police know-how. Karen had no clue what loomed. She thought I'd cave to her lime green tickets, but I'd flipped the script. That night I prepped my folder, every violation, every lie, locked and loaded. Her brother's shady history tying her to a racket targeting our community's backbone, nurses, firefighters, doctors. Folks too stretched to resist her petty reign. Sarah's tears over her Leon threat marks frustration. Mrs. Chen's whispered fears of cameras. It wasn't just my lawn or gnomes anymore. It was a war on the people who kept this town alive, and as chief, I'd seen bigger crooks fall for less. The meeting loomed like a showdown, my badge's weight steadying me. She'd strut in, tablet high, pitching her safety plan, but I'd be there, evidence ready, turning her hunter's game into a hunted's reckoning, her perfect facade about to shatter under the truth she'd never seen coming. Walking into that HOA meeting, my heart thumped like a rookie on first patrol, but my face stayed stone. Karen stood up front in her designer suit, waving papers about her community safety program, pitching more guards and street cameras, the room packed with neighbors too weary or scared to challenge her endless rules. She didn't glance my way as I slipped in, folder tucked under my arm, wading through her spiel about property values, tapping her tablet like a queen until she called for votes, and I raised my hand, badge heavy in my pocket, voice steady. Before we vote, there's something you all need to know. Her eyes narrowed, not clocking me out of uniform as I stepped forward. I'm Chief Anderson, 15 years here, and I've been investigating some issues. The projector flicked on, her illegal daycare glowing, 6 kids in her garage, no license against HOA rules, and her face flushed red, snapping. How dare you, this is private. But I slid to public records, calm as ever, showing her brother's unlicensed safe shield security patrolling us, whispers rippling through the crowd as I laid out the first punch. While you find Sarah our ER nurse for trash bins out after night shifts, you ran this business. While you cited Mark's kids, who your security operated without permits, I said, flipping slides, 47 fines in 3 months, 35 hitting first responders, a color-coded map glaring red around their homes. And Mrs. Chen stood, voice shaky. She fined me $200 for Chinese New Year decorations. Others chimed in, parents fined for chalk drawings, seniors for bird baths. Karen lunged for her papers, aiming for the door, but Mr. Jenkins, the HOA president, blocked her, barking, "Not so fast, we're discussing this." I kept going. Her security writing tickets, blocking driveways with no legal authority, impersonating cops, a felony, and the room roared, her mask cracking as she yelled, "You can't prove anything, I was making this better, these people need rules." But I shot back, "Rules apply to you too," and applause erupted, Jenkins calling an emergency vote, hands flying up to boot her from the board and ban her for life. She shoved past, tears of rage streaking her face, screaming, "This isn't over," as she stormed out, but the united neighbors, hugging, buzzing, told me it was. Sometimes justice wears a badge, sometimes it's just truth breaking through fear, and as I watched her go, I knew her kingdom was dust. Sarah clutched Mark, both fined to exhaustion, now free, and I stayed late with Jenkins, starting paperwork to refund $115,000 in bogus citations, each more absurd than the last, neighbors dropping coffee and snacks, relief in their eyes as we worked. Karen thought a petty fine would break me, but she'd picked a fight with the wrong guy, and now her hunter's game had flipped. She was the prey, and I'd just begun peeling back her corrupt little world, wondering how deep this rabbit hole went with her brother's shady crew still out there. The morning after the HOA showdown, I drove to work past Karen's house. A moving truck hulked in her driveway, her brother's fake security SUVs gone, replaced by real patrol cars I'd called to check the mover's permits. And the neighborhood exhaled, kids spilling onto lawns, free of citation dread, as word of Karen's ouster spread like wildfire. Sarah's daughter ran up while I watered my 3.5-inch grass, handing me a crayon card, me in uniform guarding a rainbow house. "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." And it landed on my station desk, a quiet reminder that the best police work sometimes happens at home. Mrs. Thompson, the retired principal and board vet, organized a barbecue to celebrate Sanity's return, folks totting potato salad and stories of Karen's reign, relief softening their faces. But my mind churned. Her brother's unlicensed outfit, the cameras, the flood contract triple billed. Karen was out, but the rot she'd planted might still fester, and as chief, I couldn't let it slide. She'd targeted our community's heartbeat, first responders, and I'd only cracked the surface of her scheme. At the station, I spread the evidence again. HOA financials showing her fine hikes funneled to her brother's company, property maps of her overextended fence, cruiser footage of blocked fire lanes. and called my deputy Tom to dig into Tom Mitchell's past. 3 states, 3 flops, all dodging probes with the same aggressive playbook, and now he'd slithered here, cloaked as elite neighborhood watch. Sarah dropped by, still in scrubs, thanking me, her lien threat lifted, 8 fines scrapped. But her tired eyes mirrored Mark's, Mrs. Garcia's, every essential worker Karen had hounded, and I vowed to finish this, not just for them, but for every neighborhood her family might hit next. Mrs. Chen's camera tip gnawed at me. Unauthorized surveillance was my turf, and I filed a request for streetlight footage, betting it'd show more than Karen admitted. My housing authority role kicked in too, quietly appointed last week, and I pitched an audit of all county HOAs, her brother's contracts first, knowing her city council cronies wouldn't shield her now, not with public records and a roomful of witnesses burying her. By noon, neighbors texted pics. Karen's moving truck peeling out, her designer suit swapped for sweats, no tablet in sight, and Mrs. Thompson called, refund checks drafted for $115,000 in petty fines, from chalk art to rose bushes, each a brick in Karen's fallen wall. The barbecue buzzed that night, Mark's kids shooting hoops, Sarah laughing free of notices, but I kept one eye on my phone. Tom's update hit. Mitchell Security's P.O. box traced to a strip mall, no office, just a front, and the flood jobs inflated bid stank of kickbacks. Karen thought she'd skate with a new board somewhere. Rumors pegged her 2 towns over, but our story had legs, and as I sipped lemonade, watching Mrs. Chen plant a new gnome, I knew this wasn't over. Her hunter's crown was mine now, and I'd chase every thread. Her brother, those cameras, that money, until her whole racket crumbled, proving power's only as good as the heart behind it. The neighborhood hummed with new life post-Karen. Mrs. Thompson's barbecue morphed into weekly potlucks. Mark's kids turned their hoop into a street tournament, and Sarah's bins sat out guilt-free, while my housing authority gig lit up my inbox with HOA horror stories countywide, folks begging to ditch their own Karens armed with our playbook. At the station, Tom's dig on Tom Mitchell deepened. His strip mall P.O. box hit a shell company, and the flood contract's triple bid traced to a bank account he shared with Karen. Her security fines greasing the wheels. I pulled streetlight footage, grainy but damning, cameras angled at first responders' homes, installed by Mitchell Security with no permits, timestamps matching Sarah's double shifts and Mark's fire calls, a surveillance net for her targets. My audit request sailed through. County brass greenlit a full sweep of HOA books, Mitchell's deals first, and I smiled, sipping coffee over Sarah's daughter's card, knowing Karen's sloppy empire was unraveling faster than she'd fled, her brother's shadow looming as the next domino to topple. Mrs. Chen waved me over at Sunday's potluck, her gnome army doubling, whispering she'd caught Karen's brother scoping her yard pre-move, same guy from her driveway chat, and I filed it, cross-checking cruiser cams. His SUV, no plates, parked near her house days before the cameras went up. Mark dropped by the station next, fire lane picks in hand, saying, "We'd have lost minutes in a blaze," and I added it to the pile, impersonating law enforcement, blocking emergency access, all felonies stacking high. The refund checks hit mailboxes, $115,000 back to neighbors, from Mrs. Garcia's roses to the kindergarten teacher's chalk art. And folks framed them as trophies, but my phone buzzed with a tip. Karen's Newtown HOA rejected her bid after someone leaked our saga, her name now mud 2 counties over. I grinned, picturing her fuming in sweats, her hunter's game flipped by a chief who'd learned evidence beats bluster every time. Back home, the new family on her block, cops themselves, joined the potluck, swapping stories of their own petty board fights, and I realized our ripple was spreading. Karen's fall wasn't just ours, it was a warning shot. Late that night, I mapped the money. HOA dues to Mitchell Security, then to the flood job, a neat little laundering loop, and Tom's latest hit. Tom Mitchell's last firm collapsed under a fraud suit he'd dodged by skipping state, but here he'd left fingerprints, bank records tying him to Karen's fine spree. I prepped a warrant, looping in the DA. Her council pals couldn't save her now. And as I watched kids bike past my 3.5-inch lawn, gnomes proud, I knew this wasn't vengeance. It was justice for every nurse, firefighter, and doc she'd bled dry. The streetlight cams blinked off next morning, County yanked them pending review, and Mrs. Thompson texted, "Barbecue's a thank you, Chief. Bring your folder, we're planning a watch group, no Karens allowed." And I laughed, her principal's grit matching mine. Karen's kingdom was ash, but her brother's turn was coming, and I'd hunt every loose end, till our community's heart beat free. Our neighborhood's pulse steadied. Potlucks turned lawns into hubs, Mrs. Thompson's watch group patrolled with coffee, not clipboards, and my 3.5-inch grass waved free, gnomes gleaming as Sarah's daughter added a new crayon card. Chief versus the bad rules, me in cape form, rainbow house aglow. The Housing Authority audit kicked into gear. Mitchell Securities' flood contract imploded under scrutiny, overbilled receipts tied to Karen's fine hikes, and Tom Mitchell's bank records showed deposits matching HOA payouts, a laundering trail so blatant the DA fast-tracked my warrant. Streetlight footage landed on my desk, hours of Karen's brother aiming cams at Sarah's mark. And Mrs. Garcia's homes, synced to their shifts, proof her security was a stalker's tool. County yanked every Mitchell deal, $200,000 in padded bids clawed back. And Tom's SUV got nabbed 2 towns over, plates still missing, his fraud history catching up as I briefed the DA. Impersonation, harassment, theft via HOA dues, all pinned to the siblings who thought us easy prey. Karen's hunter crown was mine, and I wore it with a cop's calm, not her spite. At the station, Tom dug deeper. Mitchell's last firm had bullied a nurse's widow till she sold cheap, a playbook Karen mirrored here, and neighbors kept the winds rolling. Mark's hoop tourney raised funds for a firehouse. Mrs. Chen's gnomes drew a local paper feature, Gnome Lady Beats HOA. While the new cop family hosted a block watch seminar, their own Karen tale fueling laughs. My inbox overflowed. HOA reform please statewide, inspired by our fight, and Sarah dropped by, scrubs crisp, Leon long gone, saying, "You gave us our homes back." But I waved it off. This was for every first responder she'd bled, every shift they'd worked under her shadow. The DA called Tom-faced arraignment, Karen named co-conspirator, her counsel buddies ducking calls, and I smiled, picturing her unpacking in some new town, HOA dreams dead. Our story hit a civics blog, Chief topples tyrant, and Mrs. Thompson texted, "Barbecue's a rally now, bring the warrant news," her grit turning relief into action. Night fell, kids biking past my gnomes, and I spread the case on my table. Cameras, contracts, fines. A web of petty power undone by public records and a roomful of fed-up voices. The county refunded another $50,000 in shady Mitchell fees, and Mark's fire lane pick sealed Tom's emergency access charge, a felony stickier than Karen's lawn rules. She tried another board 3 towns over, rejected after a tip, and I leaned back, coffee cold, knowing our ripple wasn't just local. My Housing Authority pitch for statewide HOA oversight gained traction. Sarah's card my talisman as I typed it up. The real wind glowed outside. Mrs. Garcia's roses bloomed. The cop family's kids chalked their drive, no notices in sight. And I knew Karen's fall wasn't the end. It was a spark, and with Tom's court date looming, I'd hunt the last threads till every worker she'd targeted could breathe free, her kingdom a lesson in how power crumbles when it forgets who it serves. A year after Karen's lime green ticket sparked this war, our neighborhood glowed. Mrs. Thompson's watch group morphed into a co-op, pooling dues for a playground where Mark's hoop tourney crowned its first champs. And my gnome stood sentinel over a lawn free of fines, Sarah's daughter adding a 3rd card. Chief's happy town, rainbows everywhere. The DA nailed Tom Mitchell, guilty on fraud, impersonation, and obstruction, 6 years locked up. Karen copped a plea, probation, and a $50,000 fine. Her name blacklisted from every HOA within 200 miles as our audit gutted their racket. $250,000 total clawed back, refunded to neighbors and firehouses statewide. Streetlight cams got scrapped, replaced by solar lights kids painted, and my Housing Authority push birthed a state law. HOA boards now needed oversight, no more petty kings, inspired by our fight. Blogs dubbed it the Chief's Crusade, but I shrugged. Sarah's grin post-shift, Mark's kids dunking Mrs. Chen's gnome empire. That's what mattered. Karen's hunter game flipped, and I'd tracked every thread till her empire was ash, proving power's only legit when it lifts, not crushes. Tom's arraignment aired her laundry, bank records, fake invoices, a daycare she denied under oath. And the Kopp family threw a watch party, their kids chalking by Karen on the drive she'd once ruled. County refunded the last Mitchell overcharges. Mrs. Garcia's roses got a trellis from the potluck crew, and my inbox sang. HOA reform letters nationwide. Teachers using our saga in class, one even quoting Sarah's card. Happy again. The new law hit. Boards had to disclose contracts, cap fines, and face audits. And our co-op hosted a seminar, Mark and Sarah teaching neighbors to spot Karen's early. I spoke too, folder open, showing how public records toppled her, and a firefighter from 2 counties overshook my hand. We're free cause of you. Karen tried one last board, 4 towns away, booted in a week, our story a ghost she couldn't shake. And as I watered my 3.5-inch grass, the DA texted. Mitchell's assets seized, funding first responder grants. A final twist she'd hate. Her kingdom fed the people she'd starved. Night fell, potluck chatter drifting, and I leaned on my porch. Gnomes aglow, kids biking, the Kopp family's grill smoking, thinking how one fine lit this fire. Sarah's Leon gone, Mark's hoop back, Mrs. Chen's cameras swapped for peace, all from a chief who'd learned small injustices cut deepest. The state law spread, 5 more signed on, and my office trained activists, but the real win was here. Mrs. Thompson's co-op built a ramp for a vet, no permits fought, and Sarah's daughter raced up, 4th card in hand. Chief's big win, me and Gnomes grinning. Karen's shadow faded, last spotted selling her tablet online, HOA dreams dust. And as I joined the potluck folder swapped for pie, I knew this wasn't just our victory. It was every worker, every home's, a lesson etched in crayon and law. Stand up, dig deep, and the biggest tyrants fall hardest when the hunted turn hunter with truth as their badge.